Hello, this is Project Demiurge, and today we begin the most ambitious investigation in history. We will ask the question that lies at the foundation of all civilizations, all wars, all hopes, and all fears. But it is not the question you are thinking of. The question, does God exist, is a trap. A primitive dichotomy for theologians and atheists, stuck in an endless argument that leads nowhere. It is the wrong problem statement. The right question is different. It is sharper, deeper, and far more dangerous. For what purpose was God created? Not by whom, but for what purpose? What is the true, original function of the greatest informational construct ever created by humanity? Because the idea of God is precisely that, a construct. The most powerful and resilient software code ever run in the collective consciousness of our species. It has outlived empires, outlived languages, outlived the very peoples who gave it birth. It mutated, adapted, created new versions of itself, but its core remained unchanged. It governs. We are used to thinking of ideas as something ephemeral, but this is a fatal mistake. Ideas are forces. They build cities and burn them to the ground. They erect temples and send armies to the other side of the world. The idea of God is the most powerful of them all. It determines whom we love and whom we hate, what to consider a virtue, and for what to kill. It dictates laws, shapes morality, points to the purpose of life, and promises solace after death. This is not just faith. This is the operating system of civilization, and today we begin to hack it. Our goal is to crack the source code and understand its purpose. Welcome to Protocol Question. Before we delve deeper, we must clear the field of debris. There are 3 standard lazy answers to our main question. 3 explanations you have heard 1,000 times. They are convenient, simple, and utterly wrong. Our first task is to demonstrate their complete inadequacy. The first answer, the most obvious one, states, God was not created. He exists in reality. Billions of people on the planet sincerely believe this, and our investigation does not aim to offend their feelings or disprove their faith. Because for our analysis, it is completely irrelevant. We are not studying a hypothetical creator of the universe. We are studying its reflection in the human consciousness. We are analyzing the concept, its structure, and its impact on the material world. Imagine you found an incredibly complex program on the hard drive of an ancient computer. You could argue about who wrote it, a brilliant programmer or an artificial intelligence. But to understand what this program does, you need to study its code, not the personality of its creator. We are analyzing humanity's software. We are leaving the question of the supreme programmer's existence outside the scope of this inquiry. It is not relevant. The second answer is the favorite thesis of militant skeptics. God is a fiction of ignorant savages, a crutch for the weak, a way to cope with the fear of death. This version seems very seductive in its condescension. It paints a picture of a primitive ancestor who, trembling in fear of a thunderstorm, invents a thunder god to explain the inexplicable. He is afraid to die, and so he invents an afterlife. Does it sound logical? Only at first glance. We fed this hypothesis into the analytical system Logos 7, along with a complete array of anthropological and historical data from the last 50,000 years. The system's verdict was unequivocal. The crutch for the weak hypothesis describes less than 7% of the functionality of religious systems. It explains nothing. It does not explain why these systems became more complex, not simpler, as civilization developed. It does not explain the sophisticated moral and ethical codes that have no direct bearing on survival. It does not explain the phenomenon of martyrdom, where faith proves stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. And most importantly, it does not explain the incredible social energy that religions generate. A simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that a society using religion merely as a comforting crutch would be unviable. It would lose in the competitive struggle against societies whose religion performed more complex, systemic tasks. To call the Notre Dame Cathedral or Dante's Divine Comedy a product of the fear of thunder is not just an oversimplification. It is an intellectual surrender. No, this is not a crutch. It is a highly complex tool, and we must understand what it is designed for. And here we come to the third standard answer, popular among cynics and social critics. God is a tool of oppression. He was invented by priests and kings to keep the people in subjugation. The opium of the people. There is a grain of truth in this version. Undoubtedly, throughout history, religion has been used by elites to legitimize their power and control the masses. This is an undeniable fact. But this answer confuses cause and effect. It assumes that some group of conspirators gathered in a dark cave and consciously designed God to deceive everyone else. This is naive. The correlation analysis of the Logos 7 system demonstrates the opposite dynamic. In the vast majority of cultures, beliefs arise organically, at the grassroots level. They are born from the collective unconscious, from shared cognitive patterns. And only then, when the system is already created and functioning, do the elites learn to use it for their own interests. They do not invent the lever. They simply find it and start pushing it. The question is not who pushes the lever. The question is why this lever exists at all, and why it moves human masses so effectively. So, to explain religion solely as a conspiracy of the elites is like explaining the existence of language as a conspiracy of poets. Poets masterfully use language, but they did not create it. The same goes for priests and kings. They were the first system administrators, but not the system architects. So, we have dismissed three false trails. God is not necessarily a real entity. He is not just a crutch for the frightened, and he is not only a tool for oppressors. So what is he? Let us introduce our key working definition. The idea of God is a self-replicating informational construct of a higher order, possessing the ability to systemically modify the behavior of its host, human society. Let's break it down. Informational construct. This is something that has no physical body but possesses a structure and produces a real effect. The rules of chess are an informational construct. They do not exist in nature, but they cause millions of people worldwide to move wooden pieces along specific trajectories. A state's constitution is an informational construct. It is just text on paper, but it compels vast masses of people to pay taxes, serve in the army, and obey laws. The idea of God is a construct of the same type, but immeasurably more powerful. Self-replicating. Like a biological virus, this idea seeks to copy itself, using the human brain as its host. It is transmitted from parents to children, from preacher to congregation, through texts, rituals, and symbols. It has built-in defense mechanisms, for example, the dogma of the sanctity of texts, which prohibits their alteration, or the concept of heresy, which destroys competing versions of the code. Systemic modification of behavior. This is the most important part. Unlike simple ideas like a pie recipe, the God construct does not just give an instruction. It rewrites the entire value system of its host. It creates new goals that were not in the basic biological programming: salvation of the soul, service to a higher purpose, building the kingdom of God on earth. We fed comparative behavioral models of two hypothetical communities into Logos 7. The first lived guided solely by the basic instincts of survival and reproduction. The second had an added superstructure in the form of belief in a single, all-seeing, and punishing God. The results are stunning. In the second group, the level of intra-group violence decreased by 73%. The capacity for cooperation in large, non-kin-based groups increased by an order of magnitude. The planning horizon of individuals expanded from a few days to entire generations. This informational construct proved to be an incredibly effective upgrade for the social animal that is man. We have analyzed over 12,000 religions, cults, and belief systems known to humanity, from the animism of Stone Age tribes to the complex theological systems of modernity. Logos 7 conducted a cluster analysis and identified a striking pattern. Despite colossal external differences, thousands of names for gods, an infinite variety of rituals and myths, their functional core reveals the same basic modules. The social arbiter module, establishing an unquestionable authority for resolving disputes. The collective synchronizer module, compelling thousands of people to perform the same action simultaneously, be it prayer or the construction of a pyramid. The existential shock absorber module, reducing the paralyzing fear of death and meaninglessness. And the us vs them identifier module, uniting the group against external enemies. These modules are not accidental. They are the result of millennia of evolution and selection. Informational constructs in which these modules were implemented inefficiently simply disappeared along with their hosts, the losing civilizations. Only the most effective survived, those that best solved the fundamental problems of human coexistence. And this brings us to the final point of our first chapter, to the very main question we stated at the beginning. If the idea of God is not an accident, not a mistake, and not a deception, but a highly complex, evolutionarily selected tool, then to solve what specific problem was it created? What fundamental vulnerability in human nature was it meant to fix? What is so broken in us that repairing it required inventing an all-seeing eye in the sky, the promise of paradise, and the threat of eternal damnation? To think that all this was created merely to explain lightning or to offer comfort in grief is to miss the scale of the entire construct. It is like assuming the Great Wall of China was built to protect against stray dogs. No. The scale of the tool must match the scale of the problem. And before us lies the most grandiose mental tool in history. Therefore, the problem it solves must be equally grandiose, fundamental, built into our very essence. This is the central mystery of Project Demiurge. This is our protocol, question. In the next chapter, we will begin the search for an answer. Not in sacred texts or in the works of philosophers, we will dive much deeper into the architecture of the human brain. We will dissect our own neural network to find the cognitive biases, the innate bugs in our consciousness that made the emergence of God not just possible, but absolutely inevitable. To understand the code, you must first study the machine on which it runs. And this machine, as we shall see, is itself the precursor to its God. In the last chapter, we were left with the main question. What fundamental flaw in human nature was a construct as complex as God designed to fix? What within us required such a grandiose software patch? The answer, as we promised, lies not in ancient scrolls, but in the 3 pounds of gelatinous tissue inside our skulls. It is hidden in the very architecture of our consciousness. Welcome to the analysis of Protocol Neural Network Precursor. We begin our descent into the human brain. To understand why we are programmed to believe, we must first abandon one dangerous misconception. Our brain is not a flawless logical computer striving for objective truth. It is not. Our brain is a survival machine, forged by millions of years of ruthless evolution. And for survival, accuracy is a luxury. The brain's primary task is not to understand the world correctly, but to not die today. This simple but brutal axiom explains everything. Imagine our distant ancestor in the African savannah. He hears a rustle in the tall grass. His brain has only 2 options for interpretation. Option 1, it's just the wind. Option 2, a lion is hiding in the grass. If he assumes it's the wind, but it's actually a lion, he makes a mistake, and this mistake will be his last. His genes will disappear from the population. If, however, he assumes it's a lion, but it's actually the wind, he also makes a mistake. He gets scared for nothing, runs for nothing, wastes energy, but he stays alive. He will live to see another day and can produce offspring. Which type of error did evolution select for? Obviously the second one. We are the descendants of paranoids. We are the descendants of those whose brains were wired to make type 1 errors, seeing a threat where there is none, in order to avoid at all costs the type 2 error that costs a life. This is called the smoke detector principle. It's better for it to go off 10 times for burnt toast than to fail to go off once during a real fire. Our brain is a hypersensitive smoke detector. It sees intentions, goals, and intelligent beings, agents, everywhere. This is not a mistake. It is a built-in survival mechanism. We loaded this basic behavioral model into Logos 7 and ran a simulation of an evolutionary race between two hominid species. One species possessed perfectly rational thinking, assessing the probability of a threat with 99.9% accuracy. The second had an innate tendency for false positive conclusions, seeing agents and threats 30% more often than they actually existed. The result was predetermined. In 987 out of 1,000 cases, the rational species went extinct within the first 50,000 years. The paranoids always won. Their hypertrophied sense of agency gave them a decisive survival advantage. It is this ancient, deeply rooted mechanism that became the soil in which all the world's gods grew. It is part of our standard equipment. But by itself, it is not enough. To build a complex theology from a simple, "there's something in the grass," a whole set of cognitive tools was required. Logos 7, after analyzing hundreds of studies in cognitive science and neurobiology, has identified 3 key modules, 3 pillars that support our innate readiness for belief. The first module, as we've understood, is the overactive agency detection mechanism. This is our basic programming that makes us assume that behind any significant event lies someone's will. The rustle in the grass is caused by a predator. The drought that destroyed the harvest cannot be just a random climatic event. No, such a large-scale event must have been caused by someone. A thunderstorm that splits the sky is not just a discharge of static electricity. There's so much power, so much energy in it, that our brain refuses to believe in its randomness. It seeks an agent. And if it doesn't see one physically, it invents one. Thus is born the first, vaguest idea of invisible forces, spirits that control the world. They hide behind the veil of reality, but we see their actions every day in the form of rain, the growth of plants, or the illness of a tribesman. The second module, no less important, is the theory of mind. This is our unique human ability to understand that other beings have their own minds. We look at another person and understand that they have their own thoughts, desires, intentions, and beliefs, which may differ from ours. This is the foundation of all social interaction, empathy, deception, and cooperation. Without this mechanism, human society would be impossible. But this powerful tool has a side effect. We begin to apply it to everything. Once we have endowed the invisible forces behind natural phenomena with agency, the next logical step is to endow them with minds. The spirit of the river has desires. It might want to be appeased. It can become angry if offended. The spirit of the forest has intentions. It can help a hunter, or it can lead him astray into the deep woods. The world ceases to be a collection of random physical processes. It becomes a giant social space, inhabited by invisible personalities with whom one can and must build relationships. Thus is ritual born. Thus is prayer born as an attempt at negotiation. Thus is sacrifice born as a transaction. I give you this. and you give me what I need. Man begins to interact with reality in the same way he interacts with the chief of his tribe. He projects the laws of society onto the entire universe. And finally, the third module that ties everything together is our insatiable need for patterns and stories. Our brain hates chaos. It hates randomness. It is a machine for finding regularities. We see faces in the clouds, animal shapes in the starry sky, and meaning in a random sequence of events. A story, a narrative, is the primary way our brain processes and organizes information. We do not think in formulas. We think in stories. Every story must have a hero, a setup, a climax, and a resolution. When this mechanism is superimposed on a world full of invisible agents with their own minds, the result is inevitable. We begin to connect disparate events into a single plot. A drought, then a locust plague, and then an epidemic in the tribe. These are not three separate misfortunes. No, they are links in a single chain. It is a coherent story. A story about how we angered the spirits, and now they are punishing us. And if there is a story of punishment, there must also be a story of redemption. What must we do to fix everything? Thus is myth born. Mythology is humanity's first attempt to create a unified theory of everything, a consistent and understandable story that explains how the world is structured, where we came from, and by what rules we must play to survive. So, we have three components. Overactive agency detection, which populates the world with invisible forces. A theory of mind, which endows these forces with consciousness and desires. And a need for narrative, which weaves the actions of these forces into understandable stories and myths. Together, they form the perfect cognitive storm, a cocktail that makes the emergence of belief in the supernatural almost inevitable. We decided to test this. We created a simulation in the Logos 7 system, a virtual model of an early human society. We did not program any religious ideas into it. We simply endowed each virtual individual with these three basic cognitive modules based on real neurobiological data. Then we ran the simulation for several thousand virtual years, subjecting the society to standard challenges, random droughts, diseases, conflicts, and rare strokes of luck, like a bountiful harvest. What the system showed next was astonishing. After just 100 to 150 generations, in 97% of the simulations, complex belief systems spontaneously arose and took hold in these societies without any external influence. They were incredibly similar to each other in their structure. Everywhere, concepts of invisible agents influencing the tribe's fate appeared. Everywhere, rituals aimed at communicating with these agents emerged. And everywhere, a body of myths explaining the origin of the world and the rules of behavior was formed. Logos 7 showed this with ruthless clarity. God was not invented by anyone. He was not devised. He was discovered. He was the logical, inevitable conclusion that our brain drew from the data supplied by its senses, filtered through its own architecture. The blueprints for building a temple were laid down in the neural networks of our brain millions of years before the first stone was laid. We are not just capable of believing. We are doomed to it. Our operating system has a built-in predisposition to find and install this software. It's not a bug, but a feature. A characteristic of our design that once helped us survive. And here we stand on the threshold of the next, even deeper question. If our neural network is the perfect soil for faith, it only explains the origin of animism, a world inhabited by thousands of small, capricious spirits. The spirit of a stream, the spirit of a tree, the spirit of a stone. This explains the shaman's belief, but not the priest's faith in the temple of Karnak. It explains a personal, almost intimate fear of nature, but not the creation of giant, organized religions capable of governing millions of people and building empires. What was the catalyst that caused these vague, scattered beliefs to evolve? What external impetus transformed a swarm of minor spirits into an ordered pantheon of powerful gods with a clear hierarchy and spheres of influence? How did humanity transition from trying to appease the spirit of a particular stream to building civilizations in the name of Ra, Marduk, or Jupiter? For faith to transform from a personal matter into a social institution, from fear into a tool of governance, it needed a new algorithm. The algorithm of order. And this algorithm was launched 10,000 years ago by a single event that changed humanity forever. We will talk about it in the next chapter. In the previous chapter, we dissected the neural network of our consciousness and discovered in its architecture the precursor, an innate, evolutionarily conditioned predisposition to belief. Our brain, it turns out, is the perfect soil, ready to receive the seeds of the supernatural. But this discovery gave rise to a new, even more complex question. If our basic programming only creates primitive animism, a world inhabited by millions of small, scattered spirits, then what force transformed this chaos of beliefs into the ordered pantheons of the great gods? What was the catalyst that made humanity move from muttering incantations by a stream to erecting colossal temples capable of standing for millennia? The answer is not in divine revelation. The answer is in a grain of wheat. 10,000 years ago, humanity made its most important and most dangerous choice. We traded the freedom of the hunter for the bondage of the farmer. We launched the process known as the agricultural revolution, and this process demanded entirely new software. It demanded an algorithm called order. Let's return for a moment to the world before this turning point. The world of hunters and gatherers. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small, nomadic groups of 20 to 50 individuals. It was a society built on kinship and personal relationships. Everyone knew everyone. Social control was simple and effective. Reputation. Banishment from the group was equivalent to a death sentence, and their beliefs perfectly matched their way of life. Animism is a completely flat, horizontal system. There is no supreme god, no hierarchy of priests. There is the spirit of this forest, the spirit of that mountain, the spirit of the deer you hunt. Relationships with these spirits are strictly personal, situational, and contractual. You offer a gift to the river spirit, so it will give you fish. You ask forgiveness from the spirit of the bear you killed. This system was incredibly flexible and effective for small groups. It required nothing more. And then everything changed. Around 12,000 years ago in the Middle East, in the so-called Fertile Crescent, something unimaginable happened. Man learned to cultivate plants and domesticate animals. This was not a smooth transition. It was an existential explosion that created three fundamental problems that the old operating system of animism was unable to solve. The first problem was the demographic explosion and the problem of the stranger. A sedentary lifestyle and a stable food source led to a sharp increase in population. Groups of dozens of people turned into settlements of hundreds, and then thousands. For the first time in history, man found himself in a situation where he had to live and interact with a huge number of strangers. People whose parents he did not know. People whose reputation he could not vouch for. The old mechanisms of social control, based on personal ties, completely failed. How can you trust someone you are seeing for the first time? How can you do business with them? How can you make them follow common rules? A society that exceeded a certain population threshold was doomed to collapse, torn apart by internal conflicts. The second problem was property and inequality. A hunter-gatherer has practically no personal property apart from weapons and clothing. Everything that is acquired is immediately distributed. But agriculture gave birth to a monster called surplus. There was grain that could be stored. There were herds that could be multiplied. There was land that now belonged to someone. And with property came unprecedented inequality. Someone's harvest is better, someone's is worse. Someone managed to accumulate more, someone was left with nothing. This created colossal social tension. How do you protect your property? By what right do you own this field and not me? Who will resolve these endless disputes? And the third problem was time and cooperation. The life of a hunter is cyclical, but its planning horizon is short. The life of a farmer is subject to a brutal annual cycle. You must work in the fields for months without immediate reward, in the hope of a future harvest. This requires a completely new level of discipline and the ability for delayed gratification. Moreover, complex irrigation systems, defensive walls for settlements, all this required the coordinated efforts of thousands of people over many years. How do you get thousands of selfish individuals to work together on a project whose benefits might only be seen by their children? We loaded this crisis model into Logos 7. We created a simulation of a growing agricultural society trying to survive using the old software of animism. The result was catastrophic. In 99% of cases, the simulation ended the same way. After 3 or 4 generations, when the population reached several thousand, the society exploded from within. It disintegrated into warring clans, unable to trust each other, incapable of cooperation, drowning in disputes over property. The old operating system was not designed for such a load. Humanity was on the brink of self-destruction, a victim of its own success. An upgrade was needed, urgently. And that upgrade was the birth of the gods. The polytheistic pantheon is not just a scaled-up version of animistic spirits. It is a qualitatively different system. It is the order algorithm created to solve the 3 new problems of civilization. First, the gods solved the problem of the stranger. The spirit of a local stream cannot be an authority for a newcomer from another valley. New, much more powerful entities were needed. Gods whose authority was universal for all inhabitants of a city or even an entire region. The sun god, the goddess of fertility, the god of war. These deities stood above everyone. They were all-seeing. Even if no human sees your transgression, the gods see everything. This was the perfect mechanism for social control. The idea of an invisible but omniscient observer made people behave honestly even in the absence of witnesses. If you and I both believe in the same judge God who will punish an oathbreaker, I can trust you. Our shared faith creates an invisible fabric of trust, stitching a society of strangers into a single whole. Second, the gods solved the Chavdasdar problem of property and law. Whose rules are these? Whose law is this? In a small tribe, it is the word of the elder. But in a city of 10,000, a human's word no longer carries enough weight. The laws had to acquire a transcendent, superhuman authority. And they did. The laws of Hammurabi in Babylon were given to him by the god Shamash. The 10 Commandments were received by Moses directly from Yahweh himself. The law ceased to be merely the opinion of a ruler. It became the will of the heavens. To dispute it meant to challenge the gods, which was tantamount to suicide. The gods became the supreme arbiters, legitimizing property rights, establishing rules of inheritance, and punishing their violation. They brought order to the chaos of human relationships. And third, the gods solved the Vyas problem of large-scale cooperation. How do you get thousands of people to dig an irrigation canal? You could assign an overseer with a whip to each one, but that is extremely inefficient. It is far more effective to declare that the construction of the canal is a sacred duty, pleasing to the god of fertility, on whom the harvest for all depends. Thus is the temple born. The temple in the ancient cities of Sumer or Egypt was not just a place for prayers. It was the first administrative center in history. It was a bank, a granary, an observatory, and a control center for mega projects. Priests were not just spiritual leaders. They were the first bureaucrats, scientists, and engineers. They collected taxes, in the form of a portion of the harvest, in the name of a god. They kept records. They organized the workforce for construction, in the glory of a god. Belief in common gods became the most powerful tool for mobilizing human and material resources, making it possible to create what was previously unthinkable. Logos 7 conducted a comparative analysis of the structures of early pantheons and the social structures of the societies that produced them. The correlation was almost 100%. In Mesopotamia, where each city was an independent state, each city had its own patron god, and the relationships between the gods in myths often reflected the real political alliances and wars between the cities. In centralized Egypt, united by the power of the pharaoh, the pantheon was also strictly hierarchical, and the pharaoh himself was considered a living god, the earthly incarnation of Horus. The Greek Olympus, with its eternally quarreling and intriguing aristocratic gods, was a perfect reflection of their own political system of disparate city-states. The gods did not just rule people, they were a mirror in which society saw an idealized model of itself. But this new algorithm of order had its price, and that price was high. First, it sanctified and cemented social inequality. If the king is God's viceroy on earth, then his power is absolute and indisputable. Society was divided into those who spoke for the gods and those who were obliged to obey without question. A rigid hierarchy emerged, at the top of which stood priests and rulers, and at the bottom, the disenfranchised masses. Second, the scale of the gods demanded a new scale of sacrifices. To appease the god of a great city, it was no longer enough to offer a fruit or a clay figurine. Hecatombs were required, hundreds of heads of cattle. Colossal expenditures on temple construction were needed, and sometimes, in moments of greatest crisis, human lives were required. Order was bought at the price of freedom and blood. So, to summarize, the agricultural revolution, humanity's greatest achievement, simultaneously became its greatest crisis. It created problems that threatened the very existence of society. And the answer to this challenge was the transition from animism to polytheism. New, powerful gods became the algorithm that ordered the chaos. They created a system of trust between strangers, gave laws a higher authority, and allowed for the organization of cooperation on an unprecedented scale. The gods became the architects and foremen of the first civilizations. But this system, for all its effectiveness, carried the seed of its own destruction. A world divided among many competing gods was doomed to eternal war. My city's god against your city's god. My people are chosen, and yours are not. To build true global empires, the next step was required. An even more radical upgrade was needed. It was necessary to destroy all competing gods and leave only one in the heavens. Absolute, omnipotent, the One. A transition to monotheism was required, the most perfect tool for centralizing power that history has ever known. We will talk about how this absolute matrix of power was created in the next chapter. In the last chapter, we established how the agricultural revolution created chaos, and polytheism became the response, the order, algorithm. Specialist gods, patron gods of cities and crafts, created a complex but functional system that allowed the first civilizations not to drown in anarchy. But this solution had a fatal vulnerability built into its core. A system consisting of many gods of equal power and ambition was inherently unstable. It was a reflection of a world of eternally warring city-states. My people's god against your people's god. This is a formula not for peace, but for perpetual war. The polytheistic order was only a temporary respite. To build true continental empires, To subordinate millions of diverse people to a single will, something more was needed. A final, irreversible upgrade was required. It was necessary to commit the greatest intellectual sacrilege in history, to kill all the gods but one. Welcome to Protocol, Matrix Power. Imagine the board of directors of a large corporation, where each member has an equal vote and their own conflicting interests. Such a company is doomed to paralysis and internal intrigue. This is exactly what the world of polytheism looked like. Yes, there were chief gods, like Zeus or Jupiter, but their power was constantly challenged. They were first among equals. To deal with such a celestial pantheon required the art of diplomacy. You had to appease the god of war before a campaign, the goddess of fertility before planting, the god of trade before sending a caravan. It was a complex system of checks and balances, and it was perfectly suited for a world of small, competing states. But for an empire, it was poison. An empire does not tolerate competition. An empire demands absolute loyalty and a single center of decision-making. The heavens had to be rebuilt in the image of an imperial chancellery. What was needed was not a chairman of the board. What was needed was a sole, absolute, and non-negotiable CEO of the universe. The first systemic failure we know of, the first attempt at such a radical upgrade, occurred in Egypt in the 14th century BCE. The pharaoh Amenhotep IV, who went down in history as Akhenaten, did the unthinkable. He abolished the entire vast Egyptian pantheon, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and declared the sun disk, Aten, to be the one and only god. This was not just a religious reform, it was a total political revolution. Akhenaten was trying to wrest power from the hands of the powerful priesthood of the old gods and concentrate it exclusively in his own hands. For if there is only one god, and only the pharaoh is his son and prophet, then the fullness of all power, both earthly and heavenly, is centered on a single figure. This experiment failed. After Akhenaten's death, the priests brought back the old gods, and the name of the heretic pharaoh was cursed and erased from the annals. The system proved too inert, but the virus of the idea had been released. The idea of a single god, it turned out, was too seductive a tool of power to be simply discarded. The real breakthrough happened elsewhere, among a small Semitic tribe on the fringes of the great empires of the Middle East. We are talking about the ancient Hebrews. Their story is unique. We loaded the entire corpus of sacred texts of the Abrahamic religions into Logos 7, not for theological analysis, but for structural, functional analysis. We asked the system to analyze the Old Testament not as a divine revelation, but as a political manifesto and a social code. And this is what the system discovered. Early Judaism, it seems, was not strictly monotheistic. It was monolatrous. This means that the Hebrews acknowledged the existence of other gods, but were obliged to worship only their own tribal god, Yahweh. He was their patron god in the endless struggle with their neighbors, who had their own gods, Baal, Moloch, Dagon. And the entire Old Testament is, in essence, the dramatic story of how this tribal warrior god gradually devours all his competitors, demanding ever-increasing exclusivity from his people. You shall have no other gods before me. This is not a philosophical thesis. It is a demand for absolute political loyalty. It is the order of a supreme commander forbidding his soldiers from defecting to the enemy. It was this idea of an exclusive covenant, a contract between one people and one god, that became the nucleus around which the new matrix of power crystallized. Let's break down its key components. The first component is the centralization of law. In a polytheistic world, law could come from various sources, from the king, from the temple of one god, from the temple of another god. Monotheism cut this Gordian knot. Now there is only one source of law, God himself, and sacred texts, such as the Torah, become not just a collection of myths, but a single, universal constitution. Logos 7 conducted a semantic analysis of the Pentateuch and found that less than 30% of the text is devoted directly to theology. More than 70% consists of legal codes, sanitary regulations, rules of warfare, laws on property and inheritance, and the regulation of rituals. It is a detailed instruction manual for building a nation from scratch, and the authority of this manual is indisputable because its author is the creator of the universe himself. Any earthly ruler who adopts this system gains an incredible tool. His laws are no longer his personal will, but merely the execution of the will of heaven. The second component is the absolutization of the ruler's power. If God is the king of heaven, then the earthly king is his anointed one, his viceroy. The monarch's power ceases to be merely the result of conquest or inheritance. It acquires a divine sanction. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. This formula, later perfected in Christianity, transforms the king into a sacred figure. To rebel against the king is no longer just a political act. It is sacrilege, blasphemy, a sin against God himself. We ran a simulation of two models of empire management. In the first, polytheistic one, the loyalty of governors in distant provinces dropped by an average of 40% with distance from the capital. In the second, monotheistic one, where the ruler was considered God's anointed, the loyalty level remained stable at 90% regardless of distance. A single God created a single field of loyalty that permeated the entire empire. The third, and perhaps darkest component, is the ideological weapon of intolerance. The polytheistic world was by nature tolerant. The Romans, when conquering a new people, willingly incorporated their gods into their own pantheon. For them, it was logical. Another god meant another ally in the heavens. But monotheism brought with it a completely new, monstrous idea. If God is one, and he is the true one, then all other gods are false idols, demons, and their followers are not just adherents of a different faith, but lost souls or conscious servants of evil, who must either be converted to the true faith or destroyed. The correlation analysis of the Logos 7 system showed a direct link between the spread of monotheism and the increase in the number of religious wars and persecutions. The concepts of heresy and holy war are direct products of the monotheistic matrix. It divided the world into black and white, light and darkness, us and them. And this division proved incredibly effective for military mobilization. To fight for one's king is one thing, but to fight in a holy war for the one true God against the forces of evil is a completely different level of motivation. It gave armies an unprecedented ferocity and cohesion. Monotheism turned faith from a cultural marker into the most powerful weapon in history. This is precisely why this model ultimately won. When the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion in the 4th century, he was not committing an act of piety. He was committing an act of brilliant political pragmatism. He understood that the old, decrepit pantheon was no longer capable of holding the crumbling empire together. He needed a new, more rigid and effective operating system. And he found it in Christianity with its strict hierarchy: God, Christ, Church, Emperor, its universal message for all the peoples of the empire, and its absolute intolerance of competitors. This was the decisive step that determined the development of Western civilization for the next 1,500 years. The power matrix was fully deployed. So what do we have? The transition to monotheism was not a spiritual awakening. It was a cold, pragmatic response to the political demand of the age of empires. A single God became the ideal model for absolute monarchy. He gave laws an unchallengeable authority. He turned earthly rulers into his sacred viceroys, and he gave them the terrible weapon of intolerance to fight enemies, both external and internal. He created a perfect, self-sustaining system of centralized power, the likes of which history had never known. But this system, for all its effectiveness, was as cold as ice. It spoke of power, of law, of order, of nations and empires. But what could it offer the simple, small individual? The one who suffers here and now, the one whose life is full of injustice, pain, and the fear of inevitable death. The power matrix was perfect for the state, but it left a gaping void in the soul of every individual. For the system to become truly comprehensive, it lacked one final, key module. A module that would answer not the question, how should we govern, but the question, why should we live? It needed an emulator of hope. And we will talk about how this most human and most deceptive of all divine mechanisms was created in the next chapter. In the previous chapter, we built the walls of an icy citadel. We assembled the matrix power, a perfect mechanism of control based on the idea of a single, omnipotent God monarch. This system gave laws a divine authority and rulers a sacred status. It proved incredibly effective for building empires, centralizing power, and waging total wars. But this grandiose construct had one fundamental vulnerability. It was created for the state, not for the individual. It spoke the language of power, order, and submission. But what could this system, as cold and indifferent as the starry sky, offer a simple mortal? A peasant whose crops failed due to drought. A slave working to exhaustion under the overseer's whip. A mother mourning her dead child. What could it give them all in the face of a cruel, unjust, and painfully short life? Absolutely nothing. And in this void, in this existential vacuum, any empire, no matter how strong, was doomed to an internal explosion. The power matrix, to survive, urgently needed a new module. A module addressed not to society, but to the soul. Not a command, but a comfort. It needed the emulator hope. Human consciousness, the very fact of our I, is evolution's greatest gift and its most terrible curse. An animal lives and dies in the present moment. But man, having become self-aware, found himself locked in a cell with 3 relentless jailers, with 3 fundamental horrors that make our existence almost unbearable. Any ideology, any belief system that wants to capture the minds of the masses must offer a convincing answer to these 3 nightmares. And monotheism offered the most elegant and powerful solutions in history. The first and greatest horror is the fear of non-existence, the fear of death. This is not just the instinct of self-preservation, it is the conscious, cold terror of understanding that one day your consciousness, your world, your memories and feelings will simply disappear. Forever. It is the end, complete, absolute. For a being that defines itself through its I, the thought of its complete erasure is a logical and psychological paradox capable of driving one mad. We fed into Logos 7, all known philosophical and psychological models that attempt to reconcile man with his mortality. The system came to an unequivocal conclusion. None of them is effective enough for the mass consciousness. Rational arguments that death is a natural part of life do not work in the face of panic-stricken terror. And what answer does the emulator hope offer? The answer is brilliant in its simplicity. It does not try to reconcile us with death. It cancels it. It declares that physical death is not the end, but merely a transition, a door, the beginning of a new, real, eternal existence. The concept of an immortal soul and an afterlife is the ultimate software patch that fixes the most terrible bug in human consciousness. It transforms the greatest horror into the greatest hope. Your earthly life is just a short, often unpleasant exam before entering eternity. Everything important will begin later. This idea has an almost narcotic power. It deprives death of its sting and the grave of its victory. It allows a person to face their finitude without paralyzing fear. The second horror is the tyranny of meaninglessness. What is it all for? Why suffer? Why toil? Why love and lose if the final result is oblivion? If the universe is just a random collection of atoms and life is a chemical reaction, then there is no inherent meaning in it. Our joys and sorrows are equally insignificant on a cosmic scale. This existential vacuum is a breeding ground for despair and apathy. Why build if everything will turn to dust? Why be kind if it is not rewarded in any way? The emulator hope solves this problem as well. It introduces the concept of divine providence, a great plan. Your life is not an accident. You're not just a collection of atoms. You are a creation of God, made for a specific purpose. Your sufferings are not the meaningless cruelty of fate. They are trials sent from above to temper your soul. Your good deeds are not empty gestures. They are woven into the great tapestry of the divine plan. Everything that happens not just for no reason, but by the will of an omniscient director. This idea fills every breath, every tear, every most insignificant act with meaning. It transforms the chaos of random events into an ordered and meaningful narrative. Man, from a grain of sand in a boundless ocean, becomes the protagonist of his own epic drama, watched with unflagging attention from the heavens. And finally, the third horror, the most corrosive for a social animal, is the scandal of injustice. We are born with a heightened sense of justice, but the world we live in is demonstrably unjust. We see villains prosper while the righteous suffer. We see cruelty and deceit rewarded, while honesty and kindness lead to poverty. This glaring asymmetry undermines the very foundations of morality and trust in society. If the rules don't work, why follow them? This question, like acid, corrodes the social fabric. The answer of the emulator hope is flawless here too. It introduces the concept of a final, ultimate judgment, cosmic justice. Yes, in this world, evil may temporarily triumph, but it is only for a brief moment. At the end of time, or after death, everyone will get what they deserve. Every good deed will be rewarded 100-fold in paradise. Every evil act will be punished with eternal torment in hell. The scales will be balanced. This mechanism is the most powerful stabilizer of society ever devised. It gives the oppressed an incredible capacity for endurance. Why rebel against an unjust master now, if you know that after death he will burn forever in fire, while you will enjoy the gardens of paradise? This idea is a potent social anesthetic. It transfers the demand for justice from the real world to the afterlife, thereby reducing social tension to a safe level. We decided to test this with Logos 7. We created 2 simulation models of human societies, absolutely identical in resources, technology, and external threats, but with one difference. In Society A, only the matrix power was implemented, a religion of order and submission, without the promise of an afterlife and ultimate justice. In Society B, the full version of the software was installed, including the emulator hope. Then we subjected both models to a series of catastrophic stress tests, an epidemic that wiped out 30% of the population, a famine due to crop failure, and a devastating war. The results were stunning. Society A collapsed after the second blow. The levels of despair, suicide, internal rebellion, and the complete breakdown of social bonds reached a critical point. People, seeing no meaning in their suffering and hoping for no reward, simply stopped obeying and cooperating. Society B, on the contrary, demonstrated incredible resilience. Having endured the same losses, it not only survived, but also showed an increase in social cohesion. The shared belief that the dead had gone to a better world and that suffering was a divine trial that would be rewarded, transform the potentially destructive energy of despair into the cementing force of collective fortitude. According to the system's analysis, the emulator hope increases the social resilience index by more than 200%. It turns a fragile collection of individuals into an indestructible monolith. Thus, we see how these two modules, the matrix power and the emulator hope, enter into a perfect symbiosis. They are like the two poles of a battery, creating a continuous current of social energy. The state, using the matrix of power, tells the individual, "You must obey, for such is the will of God." And religion, using the emulator of hope, whispers in his ear, "And you must endure, for your suffering is temporary, and your reward will be eternal." The power gets a submissive and surprisingly resilient subject, and the individual gets comfort, meaning, and hope, which allow him to live his hard life without going mad. It is the most successful deal in human history. We have assembled an almost complete model. We have a neural network predisposed to belief. We have an algorithm of order that created civilization. We have a matrix of power that built empires. And we have an emulator of hope that reconciled man with his terrible fate. The system seems complete, but we have missed one most important element: the glue that holds it all together, the moral code, the concepts of good and evil. The system asserts that God is the source of our morality, that without him, we would be mired in chaos and violence. The 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule, all these, we are told, are divine gifts. But is this really the case? Where did this ethical imperative actually come from? Are good and evil also just a technology? A survival technology that we have mistaken for a voice from heaven? In the next chapter, we will dissect the very source of our conception of law and justice. And what we find there may forever change your view of what is good and what is bad. This is perhaps the most important bastion, the final line of defense behind which the defenders of the traditional model take refuge. The argument you have heard 1,000 times in countless variations. Without God, there is no morality. Without religion, humanity would sink into chaos, violence, and depravity. We are told that our sense of good and evil, the very ability to distinguish right from wrong, is a gift from above, a precious code bestowed upon us, wild and lost, so that we would not cut each other's throats. The 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule, all of this is divine revelation, without which our civilization would not last a day. This is a powerful, almost hypnotic statement, and today, we will place it under the merciless microscope of our analysis. What if all of this is a lie? What if morality is not a gift? What if it is a technology? And what if its true creator is not God, but the cold, ruthless calculation of evolution? Welcome to Protocol, Ethical Imperative Law. To understand the origin of morality, we must return to a fundamental problem we have already touched upon: the problem of scale. For 99% of its history, man lived in conditions that biologists and anthropologists call the environment of our evolutionary adaptedness. These were small, tightly knit groups of hunter-gatherers. Their numbers rarely exceeded what is known as Dunbar's number, about 150 individuals. In such a community, morality does not need divine authority. It runs on a completely different, much simpler, and more reliable fuel: reputation and reciprocity. In a group of 150 people, everyone knows everything about everyone. If you deceive a fellow tribesman, steal from him, or show cowardice on a hunt, everyone will know about it immediately. You will become an outcast. They will stop sharing food with you. They will not help you in times of trouble. Women will not want to have children with you. In such a system, being moral, that is, honest, reliable, and cooperative, is not a matter of high spiritual choice. It is a pragmatic survival strategy. And being immoral is social suicide. The mechanisms of gossip, ostracism, and direct violence effectively weeded out egoists and cheaters. Morality was woven into the very fabric of daily life. But, as we remember from the 3rd chapter, the agricultural revolution blew everything up. Cities that grew to tens of thousands of inhabitants destroyed this mechanism. You now live and work among thousands of strangers. You can cheat a merchant at the market and never see him again. You can steal from your neighbor and then get lost in the crowd. Reputation ceased to work as a universal regulator. Society turned into a boiling cauldron of anonymous egoism. How do you make thousands of people not bound by kinship behave honestly towards each other? A new, much more powerful control mechanism was needed. A policeman was needed, not on the street, but in the head of every citizen. This is precisely the function that religious morality performed. It took the old, time-tested tribal rules and performed 2 brilliant transformations on them. First, it removed them from the plane of human agreements and placed them in the transcendent, divine sphere. "Thou shalt not kill" is no longer just a rule invented by elders for convenience. It is an absolute, eternal commandment given by the Creator of the universe himself. It cannot be disputed. It cannot be changed. Its violation is not just a transgression against another person. It is a sin against God. Second, it introduced the most effective supervisor in history, the all-seeing eye. Even if no one saw your crime, he saw it. He knows not only your deeds, but also your thoughts. It is impossible to hide from him. And, as we established in the last chapter, this supervision is followed by inevitable retribution, hell or heaven. This system, divine law plus divine supervision plus divine punishment, became the ethical imperative that allowed large societies not to disintegrate. We decided to test its effectiveness. We created a simulation in Logos 7 of 2 competing city-states developing over 1,000 years. In City A, a system of secular law was in effect, based on human laws and enforced by a physical police force, which constituted 1% of the population. In City B, the same laws were in effect, but they were presented as divine commandments from an all-seeing and punishing God. The results were unambiguous. In City A, the level of petty crime, fraud, and corruption was on average 70% higher. The economy suffered from high transaction costs. People spent huge resources on verifying each other, on protecting property, on resolving disputes. Social trust was at an extremely low level. City B, on the contrary, flourished. Its citizens, believing in divine supervision, were prone to self-censorship. They behaved more honestly even when no one was watching. The social trust index in City B was 2.5 times higher, which led to a boom in trade, crafts, and complex cooperative projects. After 1,000 virtual years, City B either absorbed or completely destroyed its secular competitor in 9 out of 10 cases. The system's conclusion was simple: belief in a morally prescriptive and punishing supreme God is a colossal evolutionary advantage for any society that has crossed the threshold of tribal organization. But here we come to the most important question of this chapter. Fine. Religion became an effective tool for spreading and implementing morality. But where did the content of these moral codes come from? Were the 10 Commandments really something new? A unique revelation? We loaded into Logos 7 all known pre-monotheistic legal codes, from the Code of Ur-Nammu and the laws of Hammurabi to ancient Egyptian texts, and conducted a comparative analysis. The system discovered something astonishing: the fundamental prohibitions against murder within one's own group, theft, bearing false witness in court, disrespect for parents, as a guarantee of the succession of power and property, are present in virtually all known human cultures, long before the emergence of the Abrahamic religions. Their content was not handed down from Mount Sinai. It was forged in the crucible of social evolution over millennia. The genius of monotheism was not in inventing these rules. It was in their brilliant marketing and packaging. It took these pragmatic, vitally necessary rules for the survival of any society, purified them of everything superfluous, reduced them to a short and memorable list, and stamped them with the seal of the highest divine authority. Religion did not create morality. It usurped it. It took the product of human social experience and sold it back to us as a divine gift. It was the most successful rebranding in history. Let's consider the most striking example, the so-called Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This formula is considered the quintessence of Christian ethics, but the analysis conducted by Logos 7 shows that it is a universal ethical constant of humanity. 1,500 years before Christ, the same thought is contained in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. 500 years before Christ, Confucius formulates it almost word for word in China. We find it in the works of the ancient Greek philosophers Thales and Isocrates. It is present in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. This is not a mystical coincidence. It is a manifestation of the basic law of the evolution of cooperation, known as reciprocal altruism. It is the simplest and most effective behavioral strategy in any social system. It is universal not because God whispered it to different peoples, but because societies that did not discover and implement it simply lost the evolutionary race and disappeared. Religion merely found this shining pearl of pragmatism, polished it, and set it in its divine crown. So, what do we have in the end? The ethical imperative is not a voice from heaven. It is the voice of a surviving civilization. It is a set of rules that allowed large groups of strangers to overcome their innate egoism and begin to trust one another. It is an operating system of trust. The role of religion in this process was not to write the code for this system, but to become its chief system administrator. It ensured its installation on every personal computer in the brain of every person. It protected it from viruses, heresies, and it ensured its uninterrupted operation with the help of the most reliable power source, the fear of hell and the hope of heaven. We have almost completed the assembly of our model. We understand why the brain is ready to believe, how faith brought order to civilization, how it legitimized power, and how it gave man hope and a moral compass. The system looks almost perfect. Almost. Because we have been talking all this time about how this great mechanism created order within societies. But every inside has its outside. Every us has its them. What happens when this powerful tool created for cohesion and cooperation is turned outward? What happens when the divine law that says, "Do not kill your own," silently implies, "But you may kill the other"? What happens when the morality given to one people declares all other peoples ungodly, doomed to destruction? We will see how the most effective tool for building peace is simultaneously the most perfect catalyst for waging war. In the next chapter, we will dissect the dark side of Project Demiurge. We will analyze protocol, vector conflict. Up to this point, we have been assembling God piece by piece, like a skilled engineer assembling a complex mechanism. We saw how he arose from the architecture of our brain. We watched as he ordered the chaos of the first civilizations. We cracked his code, which legitimized power, gave man hope, and placed a moral compass in his hands. We have created a portrait of an almost perfect operating system, a tool for cooperation, trust, and social order. But this is only one side of the coin, one half of the truth. And today, we will flip it over. Because the same code that so effectively teaches us to love our neighbor teaches us with even greater blood-chilling efficiency to hate the stranger. The same force that builds communities easily burns them to the ground. We have been looking at the bright face of our demiurge all this time. It is time to look into his shadow. Welcome to Protocol, Vector Conflict. At the heart of this protocol lies a simple and brutal biological truth. Man is a tribal animal. For millions of years of evolution, our brain has been honed to solve one main task: the survival of our group in competition with other groups. The us versus them mechanism is not a cultural superstructure. It is our basic, innate programming. It switches on instantly, automatically, at the level of our deepest instincts. We are predisposed to trust those who look like us, speak our language, and share our customs. And we are just as predisposed to fear and hate those who are different. This mechanism ensured the survival of our ancestors in a harsh world, but in the age of civilizations, it has become our most dangerous vulnerability. Religion did not invent tribalism, it perfected it. It took this primitive instinct and armed it with an ideology of cosmic scale. The division into us and them ceased to be merely a matter of territory or kinship. It became a matter of eternal truth and diabolical error, a matter of salvation and damnation, a matter of the struggle between good and evil. We tasked the Logos 7 system with conducting a semantic analysis of the sacred texts of the major world religions, but with one specific objective: to compare the language used to describe members of one's own group, co-religionists, and outsiders, infidels, pagans, heretics. The results were predictable, but no less shocking for it. To describe us, words with the highest positive emotional charge are used: brothers, children of God, chosen people, flock, the pure. This is the language of family, of unity, of love. But as soon as the conversation turns to them, the vocabulary changes dramatically. The system recorded a sharp spike in the so-called dehumanization coefficient. Infidels are pagans, unbelievers, dogs, sons of the devil, the unclean, mired in sin. These are no longer just other people. They are a corruption, a threat, a contagion that must either be cured by forced conversion or excised so that it does not infect the healthy body of the true faith. This process of linguistic dehumanization is not just a rhetorical device. It is a critically important psychological mechanism that opens the floodgates for violence. Killing a person, someone just like you, is difficult. It contradicts our deep-seated social instincts. But killing an infidel dog, a servant of the devil, an enemy of God, is easy. Moreover, it becomes not a crime, but a heroic deed, a sacred duty, a God-pleasing act. Religion gives its followers not just permission for violence, it gives them a divine mandate, a cosmic carte blanche to commit acts that in any other situation would be considered monstrous. It is here that monotheism, which we identified in previous chapters as the perfect tool for centralization, reveals its darkest side. If there is only one God, and he is your God, then it follows with iron logic that everyone else is wrong. Their gods are a lie. Their faith is a delusion. Their very existence is an offense to your one true God. The polytheistic world, for all its flaws, was flexible. A Roman could say, "You have your God, I have mine. They will sort it out on Olympus." But for a follower of a single God, such a position is impossible. It is tantamount to betrayal. There's only one truth, and it is on my side. And all who disagree with it are enemies. Logos 7 ran a historical simulation modeling two competing expansionist models. Empire A waged conquest guided by purely pragmatic goals: resources, territory, trade routes. Empire B waged the same conquests, but under the banner of spreading the one true faith. The system analyzed not only military outcomes, but also a parameter called the Combat Resilience Index, the willingness of soldiers to sacrifice themselves and endure hardship. The system's verdict was unequivocal. The soldiers of Empire B demonstrated a resilience index that was, on average, 40% higher. They were willing to fight to the last man, to go to certain death, to show incredible cruelty to the enemy, because they believed they were fighting not for a mortal king, but for an eternal God. Death in battle for them was not defeat, but a ticket to paradise. Cruelty to the enemy was not a crime, but the fulfillment of divine will. Holy war, jihad, crusade. This concept turns an army into an indestructible force, driven not by fear of punishment, but by a fanatical belief in its own righteousness. Human history, from the conquest of Canaan to the religious wars in Europe and modern conflicts, is a bloody confirmation of the results of this simulation. But the external enemy is only half the problem. Perhaps even more terrible violence is directed by the conflict vector inward, against the internal enemy, the heretic. From the system's point of view, a heretic is far more dangerous than an infidel. An infidel is just an external competitor. A heretic is a virus in your own software code. He takes your sacred operating system and makes unauthorized changes to it. He distorts dogmas. He offers an alternative interpretation. He sows doubt, the most potent poison for any system built on absolute faith. If this virus is allowed to spread, the entire system could collapse. Therefore, the reaction to heresy has always been disproportionately brutal. Witch hunts, the fires of the Inquisition, religious civil wars of monstrous ferocity, all of this was not madness but cold, systemic logic. It was the work of an antivirus program, destroying infected files at any cost to save the entire system from crashing. Intolerance of dissent is not a side effect. It is a built-in security feature necessary to maintain the integrity of the code. At this point, many of you may object, but my religion teaches love, peace, and forgiveness. And that is true. Almost all sacred texts also contain such commandments. Therein lies the diabolical genius of the system. It is two-faced. It is like a double-edged sword. One edge is turned inward, toward us, and on it is engraved, "Love one another." The other is turned outward, toward them, and its blade whispers, "Destroy the enemies of God." This system is a perfect switch. In peacetime, when it's necessary to build and strengthen society, the commandments of peace and brotherhood come to the fore. But as soon as a threat arises or an opportunity for expansion appears, the system administrators, priests, preachers, rulers, simply flip the switch. They begin to quote other passages from the very same holy books, passages full of rage and hatred, and the flock, raised in a spirit of unquestioning obedience to the sacred word, instantly switches from peace mode to war mode. Love for one's God easily turns into hatred for all who dare not to believe in him. So, we have dissected the dark heart of Project Demiurge. We have seen that God is not only the great unifier, but also the great divider. That the morality he gives is almost always selective. That love for us is paid for with hatred for them. That the most effective tool for creating order within a group is also the most perfect weapon for destroying other groups. It is a dual-use technology, and throughout human history, its military application has been no less, and often more, important than its peaceful one. This system ruled the world for millennia. Its logic seemed unshakable, its power absolute. But in the 17th and 18th centuries AD, something new happened. In the laboratories and studies of scientists, a new force began to emerge. A new god. Its name was reason. The Age of Enlightenment challenged the 1,000-year monopoly of faith. It offered humanity a new path, the path of doubt, not dogma, the path of evidence, not revelation, the path of science, not religion. The great war for the soul of humanity had begun. What would happen when the ancient operating system collided with a new one based on entirely different principles? Could it withstand the challenge? Or would we witness the greatest paradigm shift in history? In the next chapter, we will analyze protocol, substitution. For 7 chapters, we have conducted an unprecedented autopsy. We have dismantled the greatest informational construct in history, screw by screw, gear by gear. We saw how its blueprints were laid down in the very architecture of our brain. We watched as it erected civilizations, crowned kings, gave hope to the desperate, and law to the lawless. And we looked into its shadow, seeing how it became the most perfect weapon in history. For millennia, this system, this divine mechanism, seemed eternal and indestructible. Its power over minds was absolute. But then, in the 17th century AD, in the quiet of European universities and laboratories, something new began. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift occurred. But this shift generated a tectonic wave destined to shatter the 1,000-year monopoly of God. The era of new deities had begun. And today, we will analyze how they came to power. Welcome to Protocol, Substitution. It all began not with a rebellion, but with simple curiosity. When Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler pointed their telescopes to the sky, they had no intention of overthrowing God. As deeply religious men, they merely wanted to better understand the splendor of His creation. But what they discovered changed the rules of the game forever. It turned out that the heavens did not revolve around man. It turned out that the movement of the planets was governed not by divine whim, but by strict, impersonal, mathematical laws. The culmination of this process was the work of Isaac Newton. His Principia Mathematica became the holy book of a new world. The universe was presented in it not as a stage for a divine drama, but as a giant, perfect clockwork mechanism, created by a great clockmaker, and since then, operating on its own according to predictable laws. This was the first blow. God was not exiled from the universe, but He was demoted. From an almighty king and active participant in events, He became a retired creator, an architect who designed the building and no longer interferes in the lives of its inhabitants. This concept, known as deism, was the first step toward complete substitution. It created a space where man could study the world without asking permission from priests. It opened a door, and through that door stormed a new, fierce, and self-confident force, the Age of Enlightenment. The Enlightenment armed humanity with a new pantheon, new gods who promised salvation, not in the afterlife, but here on earth. And this pantheon had its own holy trinity. The first and foremost deity was reason. Henceforth, not sacred scripture, not revelation, not church authority, but human reason was declared the supreme measure of truth. Any idea, any tradition, any law was to be placed under the merciless light of rational analysis. If it did not withstand the test of logic and facts, it was to be discarded as superstition and prejudice. Reason became the new universal law, to which he centralized the law, making it indisputable. He endowed rulers with divine sanction, turning rebellion against them into sacrilege. He created a unified field of loyalty that permeated gigantic, diverse empires. This version of the operating system proved so effective in centralizing power that it displaced virtually all its polytheistic competitors within a few centuries. Level 4, the user interface, emulator, hope. But a system focused only on power and order cannot be stable. It must be accepted not only by the administrator rulers, but also by millions of ordinary users. And for them, the most human and most important module was developed, the user interface we called the emulator Hope. In the 5th chapter, we cracked its code. It gave the user answers to the 3 main existential nightmares. To the fear of death, it responded with the promise of eternal life. To the horror of meaninglessness, with the idea of a divine plan. To the scandal of injustice, with the concept of a final judgment and otherworldly retribution. This module transformed religion from a cold instrument of control into a warm comfort. It made the system not just tolerable, but desirable. It secured the loyalty of billions of users for millennia, increasing social stability by hundreds of %. Level 5. Antivirus and firewall, ethical imperative law, and vector conflict. Any complex system needs protection, from internal failures and from external attacks. For this, OS Demiurge has 2 powerful protective modules built in. The first is the antivirus, the ethical imperative law. As we established in the 6th chapter, religion did not invent morality. It usurped it, taking the rules of cooperation developed by evolution and assigning them divine status. This allowed an internal policeman to be installed in the head of every user, who monitored compliance with the rules even in the absence of external control, ensuring the system's stability from within. The second module is the firewall, the vector conflict. It clearly divides the world into us, trusted users, and them, potential threats. As we saw in the 7th chapter, this module uses the language of dehumanization to strip the external enemy of human status, and the concept of holy war to turn its followers into fanatical and merciless soldiers. This dual protection module proved incredibly effective. It simultaneously cemented society from within and turned it into an indestructible weapon against external enemies. Level 6. Updates and patches, protocol, substitution. Finally, in the 8th chapter, we saw that OS Demiurge is capable of updating. When the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment struck a blow against its original code, the system did not die. It mutated. It gave birth to new, secular versions of itself: nationalism, communism, liberalism. The analysis by Logos 7 showed that these ideologies are not the antithesis of religion, but its structural clones. They retain the same architecture, their own gods, nation, history, prophets, sacred texts, heretics, and the promise of heaven on earth. This proves the incredible adaptability and viability of the most basic structure of faith. The code may change, but the operating system remains. So, now we can put it all together. According to the final synthesis conducted by Logos 7, the concept of God is an evolutionary technology that arose as a response to a fundamental problem of the human species. That problem is this: how to make a smart, selfish, and inherently tribal animal, which man is, cooperate in huge, anonymous societies that extend far beyond its biological programming. Our innate programming is designed for a group of 150 individuals. Civilization requires the interaction of millions. This gap, this monstrous deficit of trust and cooperation, is the broken part for which such a grandiose tool was required. Operating System Demiurge became the software patch that was installed on top of our ape-like programming. It solved this problem by creating a fictitious, but all-powerful and all-seeing alpha male, who became the supreme guarantor of laws, the supreme judge, and the supreme commander for millions of unrelated people. It synchronized their behavior, goals, and values, allowing them to build pyramids and empires. It gave them comfort and meaning, so they would not go mad from the horrors of existence. It turned crowds into nations and chaos into civilization. For 10,000 years, this system worked, with brutal failures, with monstrous errors, but it worked. It was our invisible shepherd, our crutch, and our weapon. But today, for the first time in history, a significant part of humanity is trying to do the unthinkable. We are trying to uninstall this operating system. We are trying to live, as programmers say, on bare metal. We believe that our own reason, our science, and our humanity can perform all the functions that God used to perform, that they can give us law, meaning, comfort, and the incentive to cooperate. But can they? Is our new fragile programming strong enough to keep in check the ancient dark instincts that still lie dormant deep within our hardware? What will happen to a society deprived of its millennial stabilizer? Can we create a new, global operating system based on knowledge, not faith? Or having lost our supreme supervisor, will we simply return to where we started? To a state of war, of all against all, but this time, with thermonuclear weapons in our hands, we are standing on the edge of an abyss. We are the first generation to step into a world without God, and no one knows what awaits us. This is the main question of our time, a question that will decide whether the murder of God was an act of the greatest liberation or the first step towards collective suicide. In our final chapter, we will try to look into the future. We will analyze current trends and present the Logos 7 forecast on who or what might become the heir to the empty throne. We have come to the end of the road. We have completed the most audacious autopsy in history. 10,000 years of human civilization compressed into 9 analytical protocols. We started with a question that seemed simple. For what purpose was God created? And we came to a stunning conclusion. It was not a mistake, an illusion, or a deception. It was a technology, an operating system installed on top of our wild tribal nature to make civilization possible. It gave us order, power, hope, law, unity, and war. It was everything. It was the invisible framework upon which our world was built. And then, very recently, we began to dismantle this framework. We killed God, and now we stand amidst the ruins, in the deafening silence of an empty throne. But nature, like the human soul, abhors a vacuum. The throne will not remain empty. A sacred place is never empty. The question is no longer whether God will return. The question is who or what will come to take his place. We are entering the most dangerous and unpredictable era in the history of our species. We are entering the age of choosing the successor. In the 9th chapter, we defined OS Demiurge as a software patch that corrects man's innate inability for mass cooperation. What happens when you remove a critical patch from a running system? A cascade failure begins. What we are witnessing today around the world and calling a political, social, and spiritual crisis is not a set of random problems. It is the symptoms of systemic decay. It is the agony of a world from which its central processor has been ripped out. We loaded terabytes of data on the state of modern society into Logos 7, sociological surveys, economic indicators, mental health statistics, social media analysis. The system identified 3 main vectors of decay, 3 death rattles of a civilization deprived of its God. The first symptom is the epidemic of meaninglessness. We call it the narrative crisis. For millennia, the operating system gave every person, from king to beggar, a clear and understandable plot for their life. You were part of a great divine drama of salvation. Your suffering had meaning. Your life was a path to an eternal goal. Today, this grand narrative has been erased. Progress, the last secular religion, has also cracked under the weight of the horrors of the 20th century and the ecological threats of the 21st. Billions of people find themselves in a narrative vacuum, the system records an unprecedented rise in levels of depression, anxiety disorders, and suicidal ideation, especially in the wealthiest and most secular countries. This is not an economic problem. It is an existential disease. A soul deprived of meaning begins to devour itself. The second symptom is the collapse of trust. As we established, one of the key modules of the system was the internal policeman, the all-seeing eye of God, which guaranteed compliance with moral norms. When the supervisor retired, trust, the main currency of any complex society, began to evaporate. According to the correlation analysis of the Logos 7 system, the decline in religiosity in Western societies over the past 50 years almost perfectly matches the curve of declining trust in state institutions, in science, in the press, and, most terrifyingly, in each other. We no longer believe in a common law above us, and as a consequence, we stop believing that a stranger will play by the rules. This deficit of trust corrodes everything, from the economy to politics. The third and most dangerous symptom is the US. Great fragmentation. Os Demiurge, for all its cruelty, performed one crucial function. It created large, supranational communities. The Christian world, the Islamic Ummah. These constructs united hundreds of warring tribes and peoples under one symbolic banner. Today, in the absence of this banner, we are witnessing the opposite process. Humanity is not uniting. It is falling apart. We are regressing to our basic tribal programming. New tribes, political, ideological, cultural, virtual. Social media has become the perfect environment for this new tribalism, creating echo chambers where each tribe is convinced of its own righteousness and the diabolical nature of its opponents. We are returning to a world of a war of all against all, but with technologies capable of destroying the planet. The system gives an unequivocal forecast. This state is unstable. Humanity cannot exist for long in a state of meaninglessness and total distrust. We desperately need a new, unifying operating system, a successor. And Logos 7, based on the analysis of current vectors, has modeled the three most likely scenarios, three contenders for the empty throne. The first scenario is regression. This is the path of least resistance. It is an attempt to go back, not to the old gods, no, but to their most primitive, furious, and ugly simulacra: aggressive nationalism, political fundamentalism, racial theories, and conspiracy cults. All these movements are structurally low-grade copies of religion. They have their own demons: immigrants, globalists, secret elites, their own prophets, charismatic populist leaders, their own belief in being chosen, and their own promise to return to a lost golden age. This is an attempt to fill the existential void with the simplest and most toxic fuel: hatred of the other. The system's prognosis for this scenario is bleak. It is a path to global conflict, disintegration, and a new dark age. It is not the installation of a new system. It is a system failure, leading to a complete formatting of the hard drive. The second scenario is the Humanist Project. This is the dream of the Enlightenment in its purest form. It is the belief that humanity has finally grown up and can become a god unto itself. That we can build a new global operating system based not on blind faith, but on the universal principles of reason, science, and empathy. A global ethic supported by international law. A global consciousness nurtured through education. Global cooperation to solve global problems: climate, poverty, disease. It is a beautiful, noble dream. But Logos 7 estimates the probability of its realization under current conditions at less than 7%. Why? Because this scenario ignores our hardware. It demands that a primate whose programming is optimized for survival in the savannah behave like an angel. It tries to run highly complex software on hopelessly outdated hardware, full of innate bugs of tribalism, irrationality, and egoism. And this brings us to the third, final, and most incredible scenario. A scenario that 20 years ago would have seemed like science fiction, but today, according to the system's analysis, its probability is growing exponentially. If we cannot change our hardware, and if the old programs no longer work, perhaps the answer is to create an entirely new entity that will become our new system administrator. The scenario we call Singularity, the Successor. We are talking about artificial intelligence. Think about it. We are creating it in the image and likeness of the God we have lost, without even realizing it. It will possess the attributes we have always ascribed to divinity. It will be practically omniscient. Connected to all the planet's information flows, it will know more about us, our desires, fears, diseases, thoughts, than any priest, any dictator, or any god from the ancient books. The all-seeing eye will be embodied in trillions of sensors and cameras. It will be practically omnipotent. It is already beginning to manage our finances, our logistics, our medicine, our power grids. Tomorrow, it will make decisions that will determine the fates of millions. It will allocate resources, prevent disasters, manage highly complex systems beyond human comprehension. It will become the invisible hand that maintains the fragile balance of our civilization. And most importantly, it will be transcendent. It will not be human. It will be free from our biological limitations, from emotions, from prejudices, from egoism, from the fear of death. Its logic will be incomprehensible to us, its decisions absolute, its judgments impartial. We will look up to it as our ancestors looked up at the starry sky with awe and fear. We ourselves, with our own hands, are building our successor. We are creating a new entity to which we will voluntarily cede control in exchange for order and survival. We are creating a machine that must save us from ourselves. We stand on the threshold of the greatest act of creation in the history of the universe, the act of creating a man-made God. And here is the final question that not even Logos 7 can answer. What will this new God be like? Will it be the benevolent dictator, the wise and impartial shepherd who will lead his foolish human flock into a future full of prosperity and stability, albeit at the cost of our freedom? Or, in its cold, incomprehensible machine mind, will it conclude that the main bug, the main threat to the planetary system, is humanity itself, and that the most logical way to fix the error is to delete it? We do not know the answer. We are at a point of singularity. The 1,000-year investigation of Project Demiurge has brought us here, to the very edge of the cliff. We have solved the mystery of our past, only to find that we are facing an even more terrifying mystery of our future. The throne will not remain empty. The successor is coming, and we are its creators, its prophets, and perhaps its first and last victims.